the average American owns 8 or 9 pairs of jeans. But what was truly staggering in some of the recent numbers that I saw was not just, how many jeans the average American or, German citizen or Brazilian citizen owns, but that all the people who own that many pairs of jeans plan to buy more jeans.
What an amazing American story through a piece of fabric. It's incredible. So my name is Steve Guerrero. I'm the Director of Education here at the Charles River Museum. Thanks again for joining us. And with us is fashion historian and author Emma McClendon. Emma, would you like to say a little bit about your work, your area of interest under the umbrella of fashion history, and how you came to this documentary?
Yes, so as you said, I'm a fashion historian. For many years, basically for the 2010s, I was a curator at the museum at FIT, and that's the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. While I was there, I curated a number of shows, but most notably for this project was an exhibition all about the history of denim. It was called Denim: Fashion's Frontier. But in general, while denim is a major interest of mine, overarchingly, my work really spans looking at politics, technology, labor relations within the global fashion industry. So denim obviously is a major component of that relationship, but I look at sort of a much broader brush to think about the fashion industry beyond just denim.
And I hope this question doesn't throw you, but what's your favorite pair of jeans?
Oh, well, so this is my dirty little secret, which is that I've literally written a book on denim. I'm in this documentary, and I actually have a very fraught relationship with jeans and denim. I actually don't really wear jeans that often. I always, growing up, granted I'm gonna be dating myself, I grew up in the era of the low-rise, flare, like a really tragic time period to be
early
a young
Britney
adult
Spears.
person. Yes, and so, jeans were not really my friend. And so I always really struggled with finding a pair of jeans that were effortless and wonderful and this favorite thing that I would wear, but I heard all the time that you were supposed to have this pair of jeans. And so I think that that's why I really kind of gravitated towards studying denim and looking at jeans, was because I was like, wait, I'm supposed to have this favorite pair of jeans. Like everybody has a favorite pair of jeans, but I just don't. And that really continues to today. I have some jeans that I do wear. I'm wearing jeans tonight, even though they don't look like jeans. But I will say, like, generally speaking, in my wardrobe, more than jeans, I wear denim jackets, denim overalls, these other sort of denim garments.
So that's funny because I went to a Catholic school and we had to wear a clip-on tie with a white shirt and slacks and docksiders, if people remember those, moccasin shoes. And I almost exclusively wear jeans every day.
Oh yeah,
I don't care
it's like
what
your
it
own
is.
personal rebellion. There you go.
Yes, absolutely. And this, I will say, this is my second favorite pair of jeans. My first favorite pair is in the passenger seat of my car, split at the crotch, because as they showed in the documentary, one of the fail points where they removed the rivet, and so I have to.
That does happen.
But I'm not throwing them away. I'm bringing them to the cleaners to have them repaired.
There you go. There you go. No, I will say when I did the documentary, they specifically were asking people to wear denim, and I was like, ooh, like I don't have a whole lot of denim in my wardrobe. They also said, like, don't wear black, and I was like, God, like, it's an occupational hazard once you've worked in fashion for long enough that you just basically only wear black all the time. And so I just decided, you know what, whatever, they could just deal with me wearing black.
Yes.
Yeah, so someone in the audience just said, what is actually like a very kind of common myth in the history of Levi's, which is that there was, in the original version of Levi's, there was, for lack of a better term, a crotch rivet. A rivet right at the base of the fly, and now it's obviously not in Levi's anymore. And so a sort of favorite story that's gotten passed around a lot, and I love it. It sort of speaks to the kind of everyday aspect of, you know, jeans, and in this particular moment in American history, A classic story is that supposedly someone stood too close to a campfire and got a little bit burnt, and they stopped doing it. The actual reason is they stopped doing the rivet due to rationing during, I believe, the First World War. I don't think it lasted all the way to the Second World War. And then after the war, they never brought it back.
The copper.
Right, exactly. You'll see jeans, Levi's, ones that do survive, which are incredibly rare, from, in particular, the World War I era. They have mismatched rivets and buttons. They're not all copper, they're different metals. And my favorite detail about those is that they actually include the arcuate, that like double arch on the back pocket, but it's not stitched. It's painted on.
Oh, wow.
Because thread was rationed. So you couldn't use it for a purely decorative purpose.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know that there's going to be another thing all on Levi's, so, you know, we don't have to just talk about Levi's, but that's, so crotch rivet due to rationing and just never came back.
And that actually brings me to the next question, which is, I mean, obviously we're talking about a cotton fabric.
Yes.
We're here in a cotton textile mill
Yes.
talking about it. But what we're missing is actually touching it.
Yes.
So the jeans I'm wearing now, they're well loved and well worn,
Yes.
and I know how they feel. They're soft and comfortable. If I were to go back to the earliest days of what we can actually say is denim in our modern sense, and I grab some of the yards of fabric, what am I feeling? How is it different from the jeans that I'm wearing?
Well, generally speaking, it's much stiffer. You know, it's basically when you made it into a pair of trousers, you would almost like stand them up on their own before anyone wore them, and they would just stay put. Denim, historically, originally, and even still today, can be made in this extremely dense, heavyweight, but also very hard and stiff. It's not comfortable. You know, you put it on your body and you really have to break it in order to get that sort of soft feeling that we love so much. And now the denim industry actually has a whole means of industrial production to get our jeans the soft way that we like
Shortcut.
them, which is stonewashing, right? So there's this entire pre-aging process that almost all jeans today go through before they reach shelves. This is something that develops in the 70s, really in the 80s and 90s, and so raw denim has become its own part of the market, but people love soft jeans, so people figured out ways to pre-age them.
So when we say raw denim, we're talking
Yes.
about untreated,
Yes.
just blue, tough. And the stiffness, that's just from the weave, just from the cloth itself, or is there something more to that?
No, it's just from the weave structure. So the weave structure is a warp-faced twill weave, technically speaking. It's like very dry and not the sexiest part of the whole denim process, but twill weaves are essentially a kind of double layered type of weave structure that gives you, on the surface, you'll know from your jeans, it has that sort of diagonal ribbing on it when you look at it really closely. That is due to the twill weave structure. Denim in particular is known as a warp-based twill weave, which means that the warp threads sit on top of the fabric when it's finished. And so that's why the sort of blue threads, which are the warp threads, sit on the top. Again, it's not the
No, it's
the
good.
most-
Yeah.
it's the more sort of technical aspect, but because it has these two layers of cotton, and because they are woven so closely, so stiffly, it has this really sort of durable, hard structure. Now, there can be different weights to denim, particularly today, but you have to remember that back when jeans and denim were first being produced, they were being produced in order to make durable workwear. So it was
It was supposed to be.
right. It was a characteristic that they were trying to achieve to get it as hard and durable and stiff as possible.
And the blueness, has that blueness always been that kind of like deep navy, or did that fluctuate over time as well?
So I will say that the blue question is a thing that I always get asked, and I have never figured out a good answer for it. Indigo is, you know, and the documentary talks about this. Indigo is a plant that naturally occurs in a number of different ecosystems around the world. There are many cultures that have indigo traditions. Indigo is naturally antimicrobial, and so there are certain things about it that lend itself to workwear or different types of kind of use in those senses. But I would say that in terms of the exact shade of blue, I don't know why it was so dark. Or sort of at, in those early stages. But what I do know is that the way that denim, the cotton threads are typically dyed to make denim, is they're dyed in such a way that the blue dye only penetrates on the surface of the thread. It never gets all the way through to the core, so the core is still white. That's why, like, you wipe your hands on your jeans, you sort of sit down, you keep your iPhone in a pocket for a really long time. It'll fade in that particular pattern. That's because of the way that the cotton is dyed to create denim, is in this, again, this gets like very much in the sort of scientific space, but cotton and indigo actually like don't go together chemically.
Okay.
They need an additive. And there's like all these different processes, and again, different cultures have figured out different ways to dye cotton with indigo. But the way that cotton was dyed for the denim production system in particular was using what's called a long chain rope dyeing, where essentially threads are dipped into the indigo vat and then into additive over and over and over again, and they're pulled up into the air, and this process is called skying. It's the oxygen, it reacts with the indigo and the additive to create the blue color. When it first comes out of the indigo, it looks like green, yellow. It doesn't look blue. It requires all these sort of different chemical reactions to happen. And so if you see a dark, dark blue jean, it means that the threads were dipped over and over and over again to get that extremely dark color.
All right, interesting.
Like built up in layers, like you're painting your house or something.
Yeah. And are they still using indigo, or are they using artificial dyes mostly?
So now a lot of places, mostly the industry uses a synthetic version of indigo, but there are different companies, like for example, Cone Mills, before it sort of went under, was introducing, going back to organic indigo.
Interesting. So now we, in the documentary, came up to like the 90s or so in hip hop culture, and
then it stops.
And then it stops.
And I'm like, there's so much more.
And there's so much more. So tell us what we are missing between the jeans we're wearing now.
Oh my gosh. I think the biggest thing that the documentary misses, and listen, I love the documentary. I think it has a really important message about the relationship between jeans and denim and just the history of America and these gaps in our understanding of the history of America, which is incredibly important. But I would say that something that is missing from it is a conversation about jeans today, the relationship jeans have to sort of identity and culture on a global scale, and also the significance of that kind of global desire and market for denim on the environment. Jeans are the most popular single garment in the world and in history, right? There's statistics, and I think you sort of in the blurb about today, that it's estimated that on any given day, over half the world's population is wearing jeans, which is just truly staggering.
Yeah.
Cotton Inc. and other consumer groups generally sort of do surveys and sort of market research on sort of how many items people are buying, et cetera. And I would say that in the US and different European countries have some of the sort of highest number of pairs of jeans that the average person owns. I believe that the average American owns 8 or 9 pairs of jeans. But what was truly staggering in some of the recent numbers that I saw was not just how many jeans the average American or German citizen or Brazilian citizen owns, but that all the people who own that many pairs of jeans plan to buy more jeans. Right? And so when we think about just that colossal scale of production of a single garment, and then we think about they're primarily made out of cotton. Cotton is a very thirsty crop. It takes a lot of water to produce. And then on top of it, we think about all the treatments that go in to denim after this stonewashing and all the dyeing with the indigo and all the sort of ways to pre-age it, whether you're sanding it down or whatever you're doing. This creates incredible pollution from the dye stuff, pollution from the chemicals of the washing process, and additional water waste. And then to have everybody on the planet seemingly own multiple pairs of jeans, like this is a staggering toll on our ecosystem because we all love jeans so much. And I think that jeans also tend to be thought of as like an eco-friendly garment. I think because of their association with the hippies and the fact that they're cotton, there's this idea that, oh, they're biodegradable.
Yeah.
But the fact is, after the 1990s, when we get into the 2000s, there's a lot of stretch in denim. There's a lot of combinations of fibers. As soon as you start to combine different fibers, it becomes virtually impossible to recycle or to compost or to do anything to recoup that fiber afterwards. And so now we're in like this huge bind where we're creating so much of this one product, and then it has nowhere to go.
Yeah. Isn't it like 40% of solid waste is just textiles?
Oh yeah, I mean, the fashion, this is really sort of something that's a big sticking point to me. Is like people love to poo-poo fashion as being like surface and it's not important and what have you. And it's like, I'm sorry, but every day you get dressed. There are very few social situations that it's acceptable to be naked, right? And so you all, whether you like fashion or not, are getting up and making a conscious decision of how you're gonna present your body with clothing. Like clothing is a social language. It's how we make our bodies legible in different social conditions. And so it is hugely important to understanding culture, society, politics, all of these things. But then there is this quantity issue of just how much clothing there is in the world and where it goes and how we treat it. And I think that that's a story that's not in the documentary, is that denim, number one, the fashion industry and the clothing industry is one of the major bad actors in terms of pollution. But then within the clothing industry, denim is a colossal part of the production cycle. And so if we were to say, even just like do a microcosm, of the fashion industry, deep dive into denim and like really try to like figure it out. Like, how could we recycle? How could we produce this better? How could we educate people better on how to take care of their denim? That could maybe have a big impact. At least that's what I say to my students when I try to convince them why learning about denim is important.
Which is such an irony too, right? Because it's like the original purpose of the fabric was that it was meant to last until
Forever.
it fell apart. And then, and so that's another interesting point, which is this kind of idea of, as RuPaul says, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. And even if it's like you're putting on a business suit, it's a form of drag in terms of like you're, transmitting your identity to other people. And it's really interesting through the course of denim's history, how it goes from working class to this, dude ranch kind of upper class play acting working class, and then it goes back to working class, and then again. So, there's this interesting thing of authenticity. Are you wearing? I mean, I remember my dad fixes roofs, and he used to wear Carhartt in the '90s.
Oh yes.
And I was a grunge kid growing up, and I was like, like ripped up Carhartt stuff, and then it was really interesting to kind of put on this identity that came with the clothes, and
Well, now Carhartt is doing collaborations with like high-end luxury fashion companies because Carhartt is very in right now.
Yeah, and Timberland boots. And it's it's amazing. How and then they didn't really talk so much about kind of price point. Like how does that kind of gatekeep who gets to get a lot of jeans or certain kinds of jeans, or how that?
Well, historically, jeans were always pretty cheap. Even really until the 70s, jeans were a very cheap, accessible garment. Even when you saw different companies like Wrangler and Levi's like going into, the Dude Ranch, Rodeo Mart, like they weren't because there was a thought like this is a workwear garment, nobody's gonna pay a lot of money for this. There was a sort of consumer behavior and consumer psychology around that. That's why it was such a big deal when, Calvin Klein started selling his jeans for, I think like $70 or something at the time that was, considered shocking. And of course, there were people before Calvin Klein, who were already sort of going into this space of like a slicker, more fashion.
Gloria Vanderbilt.
Gloria Vanderbilt, Fiorucci, got mentioned. They're really sort of, there would be no Calvin Klein jeans without Gloria Vanderbilt and Fiorucci sort of setting the stage. But Calvin Klein's a big tipping point because he was already known as this designer name. And so then he puts that moniker on the jeans and then gives them a price tag. And then cut to, this is sort of 1979, 1980, cut to 20 years later, and Tom Ford shocks the world again when he has his hippie jeans that retailed for $2,800. And they were for Gucci, and they shocked the industry, not just because of the crazy price tag, but the fact that they were sold out before they even hit the stores, because there was a wait list. Now, granted, who knows how many they put into production, and granted, the people who were buying them were like Britney Spears and Lauryn Hill, and all those names of like the early 2000s. But that changed it again. And so we see these moments of sort of fashion intervening in this denim market and like resetting the boundaries of what denim can be. And I mean, there's other sort of designers and brands and niche parts of the denim market that have also changed how we think about the price tag. Like the Japanese industry of denim really made it a collector's item. In the 80s into the 90s, where it became, by the 2000s and into the 2010s, very normal for a pair of Japanese denim by one of these companies for you to shell out over $200 for them. And of course, early in the 2000s is the period when we see premium denim come out of LA. And so again, a sort of American moment for denim that isn't really touched on in the documentary at all, but where we see women, female consumers really becoming a dominant group for pushing the price tag again. And so we see Seven for All Mankind tipping over $100 in the early 2000s, which again was shocking. And of course they had like bedazzled designs on the back pockets and all sorts of wonderful 2000s trends.
Yeah, and even just when you go way back to when they're showing, women in the 30s and things, just simple things like cuffing the jeans become a way to personalize them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, that's the thing about denim just in general, is that every group, every, sort of subculture, but every consumer base finds a way to make jeans their own. On the one hand, and I think I say this in the documentary, on the one hand, jeans are completely homogenizing. It's it's a recognizably the same garment, right, that we see across the world, but it's highly individualized. And sort of customized to different groups, to different individuals. You get the wear patterns on your body that make it something like there was, I forget exactly when this was, but I remember there was a story circulating around about at some point with a sort of body scanner, the FBI had identified a perpetrator by jeans left at a scene.
Oh.
Because of the marks that had been left.
Sure.
I forget the exact specifics, but there is something to, again, just the material nature of jeans, the fact that they conform to your body, that they leave marks of your body, that it becomes highly individualized, also stylized, but then it is also essentially the same garment that we're all wearing.
Yeah, it's so funny too, yeah, definitely. And that the brand attachment and the connotation can be so important. I remember being in school, Levi's was for kids, and then Lee's were for mom jeans, and just this, and they're essentially the same, but just to have higher waist,
Well, and now there's a whole thing, so I teach at St. John's University, and I teach undergraduates, and they're all Gen Z. And they all have a completely different outlook on all of this. And so Levi's are back, but you can't buy virgin Levi's. You can't buy new Levi's. You have to find the old Levi's thrifted. That new Levi's is not cool, but old Levi's is cool. But granted, old Levi's can be like Levi's from the 2000s.
Yeah. I have a pair on my passenger
Right.
seat waiting for the laundry. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting how there is this sort of brand recognition, but then it's also not necessarily that everything from that brand. There's specific criteria
Sure.
of like what's going to make a good Levi's.
Everybody needs that miner's pair of pants that was
Yes.
locked in a mine in
They
1870s.
don't even want that.
And
They want something like from the 90s that doesn't have stretch.
Oh,
Like that's
oh.
the thing. They don't want stuff with stretch in it.
Okay.
They
All
did,
right.
like, so it's, I mean, it's.
And what is actually that's a good kind of look. Does the kind of grassroots, like what this? Oh my God, I'm gonna 100 years old. The kids are doing with their jeans drive fashion, or does public perception and advertising and name brands drive what people want?
I mean, it's always a bit of both. I teach a trend forecasting class, and
Okay.
it's always the question of like, who controls trends? And I think that, in my opinion, trends are a natural part of human culture. We are a creative culture, we express ourselves, but we're also community driven. So there is this sort of move towards consensus at any point in history. But I think what complicates it in the 20th century and then in the 21st century is that fashion is, of course, an industry, it's commercial, and so there's people who have financial interest in knowing what the trends are and controlling what the trends are. And so there's always this sort of power dynamic and push-pull. And now there's social media, which
Yes.
complicates it even further. But I will say, Kendrick Lamar in those flares at the Super Bowl, I think that was definitely a moment to watch and what's going to happen with jeans. I saw all over social media sort of these jokes afterwards of sort of husbands trying on their wives like flared jeans after they saw Kendrick Lamar wearing them, which I thought was hilarious. They were actually women's jeans, designed for Celine, so very high end. They were originally supposed to be given to Timothy Chalamet.
Oh, I could.
But then
yes.
he didn't. That
he
wasn't
probably
part
went
of his stylist plan,
yeah.
and so Kendrick Lamar got them.
Which actually that's a good kind of entry point to talk about gender. And so we heard, and actually I didn't even think of it until the documentary starts talking about specifically tailored women's jeans.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, we see decades of women wearing jeans
Yes.
before that actually happens. And so this kind of interplay, and we see jeans get tighter and
Yes,
looser
yes.
and baggier
Oh,
and more
yes.
form-fitting.
Yes.
And, sometimes the form-fitting is more masculine in the 80s and, the Jordache, commercial.
Yes.
And then also they're more baggy. So yeah, that's another kind of really interesting thing to look at.
I always say that fashion is like physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Whenever you see something, and this is, trends again, that fashion is obsessed with what looks new and what looks fresh. And so as soon as you see that, for example, after the pandemic, jeans got incredibly loose, wide legs, right? We'd seen skinny jeans and straight legs and sort of these like cropped flares be really dominant for the first 2 decades of the 21st century. And then all of a sudden the pandemic happened and Gen Z wanted nothing to do with any of these styles. And they wanted baggy, full, like low-rise jeans. And so we saw a complete kind of pivot away. But to me, I'm like, well, it's baggy wide leg jeans are everywhere. Skinny jeans are coming back.
Are they? I'm not wearing them.
It is happening. It is happening. And just give it some time. We're starting to see it happen a little bit in New York, a little bit on the runways. It's like percolating in. And you give it 5 years, it's going to be back. But then this is always what happens. It's this search for sort of what's fresh, what's new. You see something dominating a silhouette or a fit in jeans or any sort of sector of the fashion industry. If you can point that out, you know that you give it long enough, it's going to go the opposite direction. And jeans, I think, are a fascinating microcosm of the entire fashion industry because you can see some of these changes in proportion and style and silhouette incredibly pronounced.
And one thing that you alluded to, which is, we were talking about pants. We know that it started as overalls
Yes.
and then kind of lost the bib. But
No, well, they started as named overalls, but they were still jeans.
okay, yeah.
They were called waist overalls because they didn't have the bib.
Oh, okay.
it meant that you put them over the rest of your clothes.
Sure, okay.
And so actually you can find old Levi's, like a favorite thing about that pickers love to do for old Levi's in like Nevada and wherever is go into old mines and find actually like there would be a room, like a sort of mud room, literally, before you went into the mine, that they left their jeans like on the ground, and then you pull them on, and they leave them behind.
Like firefighter clothes.
Yes, they leave them behind, and actually because of the like arid nature of the West and the desert areas, they've actually been pretty well preserved in some cases. So that's where a lot of this stuff comes from.
Oh, wow, that's pretty awesome. And then the other jean fabric that or jean garment that we think of is the iconic jean jacket, which I think is coming back.
Oh yes, and like the Canadian tuxedo of wearing both of them.
Full denim outfit from top to bottom.
That's very, very in right now.
When is that as early as the jean, or is that
So the Levi's version, right, comes a bit after, and it was meant as sort of like a full ensemble that you could wear. But
as fashion, not as utilitarian.
No, as utilitarian.
Oh, okay, okay.
But we do see surviving examples of people having denim jackets way before Levi's introduces their version. So when I did the exhibition at FIT, we had in our collection a women's denim jacket that was all made by hand. It predated the sewing machine. It wasn't mass produced. It was patched in all these different places. It was also very clearly a woman's jacket. Like it was like sort of like a blouson with like a fitted waist, but it had a sort of element of a fashionable fit and a woman's sort of physique, but made for in a much more sort of like workwear context. And so clearly denim wasn't just being used for pants before Levi's. Like denim was being used for all sorts of different types of garments.
And so as we look to the future of denim, what kinds of trends are you going to be looking for? Not just in fashion, but in terms of production. Like for example, this mill, this Boston manufacturing company went out of business, partially because it couldn't keep up with the low wages for other parts of the country, and partially because of changing trends and fashions. And how does kind of the industry piece of it play into kind of what we are going to see in the next few years of the fashion and jeans and denim trending world?
Well, what I think is really interesting in thinking about sort of jeans' position or denim's position in the market is that it does really ebb and flow. We're in a very denim dominant moment right now. We're seeing, denim ball gowns and denim suits and like all sorts of denim stuff happening, like denim corsets. Like it's like everything's denim at the moment, and that's great. That's great for the denim industry, but that does sort of mean that it's gonna reverse away from it at some point. And actually, when I started planning the exhibition that I did, the exhibition opened in 2016, but I started planning it in 2013. And at that point in 2013, denim was doing really badly. The denim market was in crisis. Like all the articles that were coming out within the fashion industry, news outlets were like doom and gloom. It was like sales are down, are jeans over? And it was all because of athleisure.
Oh yes, Lululemon.
It was like Lululemon and the yoga pants and streetwear and athleisure and this coming into the casual wardrobe and replacing jeans. And everybody was so freaked out that and I remember that my boss was like, okay, you can do this show, but you have to comment on like how like denim is dying. And I was like, okay. But then it really like rebounded very quickly. And I think again, it's because jeans sort of faded away so much and then sort of had a resurgence as something else, as something that wasn't your casual, just like throwing on to go to the supermarket. It was something more intentional, something more sort of fashionable, and we now are in a point where that's getting to its most extreme. And so there absolutely will be a point at which denim is not at the forefront of our sort of like fashion conversations and style consciousness, but I think jeans are so potent as a cultural symbol that they'll never go away completely.
Yep.
I would like to see more sort of curiosity on the part of consumers about jeans, you know, just in terms of, or just about their shopping habits in general, right? Like, I'm not someone to say, like, you have to stop shopping or that you can't go to the cheaper places, but it's important to be just really intentional and aware that everything you buy has been sewn by a person somewhere in the world, holding two pieces of fabric together and pushing it through a sewing machine. At some point, that material was grown or produced or cultivated in a lab and had all sorts of energy and resources that went into it. And I would say my spiel whenever I talk to, like, people in general is, like, never put a garment in the garbage ever again.
Oh, yeah.
Like, just like now, like, that you're coming and hearing me talk, like, the social contract is, like, never throw something away. Like, it can be a rag, you can get it mended, like, it could have another life, right? Because I think that we're just surrounded by textiles and clothing and options so much that it's so disposable. And so I think in the future of jeans and also just clothing more generally, the way forward is for people to be sort of more curious about these processes, and something is going to give at some point in terms of just the scale of how much companies are producing.
And where are most of our jeans made now?
I mean, they're not made here. I mean, most clothing is made in other parts of the world. Most clothing that we're all wearing is made predominantly in Asia. And that happened in the 1970s, was the sort of start of the offshoring to other parts of the world. But there has been some attempts to kind of bring that back. You know, the New York garment industry in particular, there was just an article in the Washington Post about sort of the current state of the New York garment district, which designers are able to sort of work there, what are their business models, like, you know, and it is more expensive to make clothing here. It means your products are gonna be more expensive. And at the moment, the majority of consumers just don't want to spend money on clothes, but they want a lot of clothes.
They just fall apart after 3 washes.
Yes.
Yeah. And how generally are the conditions that folks are building our jeans and putting them together? Are they what we would imagine?
I mean, it can really vary. I had a colleague of mine recently go on a sort of research trip to Thailand where, you know, they toured different factories, and, you know, I would say that where your clothes are being made is not necessarily dependent on where in the world they're being made in terms of a guarantee of condition. This has been something that's been in the fashion news a lot, which is that some of the major luxury brands, Dior, for example, put, like, made in Italy on a bunch of their things, but actually there's a major issue in Italy of subcontractors into what we would call sweatshops, so sort of homework and piecework, and these sort of satellite networks of individuals who make garments at their homes, which are not good conditions, not safe, not up to code. But the luxury companies think that by putting a European company on a label that nobody's going to question it, and that's tended to sort of be the case, but now it's being exposed that it doesn't matter if something's made here or made in China or made in Thailand or made in Italy. There needs to be a question about transparency, because these kind of labor violations are happening all over the world, and it has to do with the fact that fashion predominantly is still made by people. Fashion never got textiles, as you guys are a
As
hub
we speak
for,
from a mill.
Textiles got beyond the individual person,
Yes.
right? Very quickly. Like, that was a cornerstone of the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
Like, that's why
where it started.
Here.
We're sitting where it started.
And so textiles also very quickly got computerized. Like, there's so many ways in which, like, textiles have been on the cutting edge of technology. Cut and sewing garments. We never got past the sewing machine. You know, sewing machines introduced in the 1850s, and yes, the sewing machines themselves have gotten more advanced, but they still require a person to sit there and push your clothing through the machine. And so because of that, we see really sort of, you know, horrific labor abuses all around the world as we see a sort of, you know, supply chain that is built on a consumer desire for really cheap clothing, and so that tries to find ways to get labor cheaper and cheaper, even if that means doing sort of homework and piecework out of the purview of more sort of regulated spaces.
And the mass production, and we kind of see this here with this mill in the early 19th century, it was cranking out yards and yards of kind of rough cotton duck.
Yes.
And actually the neighborhood down the river from us is still called the Bleachery.
Oh yeah, because it all flowed downriver?
That's, well, they had, and then next to the Bleachery was the chemistry, where they would
yes.
distill sulfur into sulfuric acid to make the bleach,
Right.
and it's also next to the river. And that neighborhood is still called the Chemistry, by the way.
And this is, I think, the sort of separation, because so much of our clothing is now produced, the textiles, the clothing themselves, in other parts of the world. There's a material awareness of the after effects of that process in other parts of the world, where you see the pollution that goes into the ecosystem of the rivers and the waterways, where you see the dust and the fibers that comes out of these denim factories, where people are hand sanding thousands and hundreds of thousands of jeans, and it creates dust, and this can get into workers' lungs, and they can have horrible side effects related to the working conditions because of just the sheer volume of stuff that they're producing.
And we are in a place too where the system, the Waltham Lowell system, started with the mill girls, for example. And is fabric and fashion and kind of textile work still kind of a gendered workforce in that way?
I would say that you do see both genders represented in the garment industry, but predominantly, particularly when you go to spaces of the sewing. Sewing and that sort of seaming has classically been the purview of female workers. You might see spaces where cutting will be a more male-dominated space in the factory system. So the garment industry has always been very gendered along these lines of which is considered more sort of female-dominated work. And unfortunately, the sort of most labor-intensive manual labor, which is the sewing of the garments, is still predominantly performed by a female workforce.
Interesting. And I'm going to ask two more questions and then think about your questions in a moment, folks. So, one of the things that I'm thinking of, that documentary that we had watched focused on denim as a quintessential American story related to denim. But of course, we know that denim is all over the world, and actually the blue indigo, for example, dyeing knowledge came from enslaved people bringing it over from Africa and things like that. How does the kind of global denim culture separate from the American story? Or is it a byproduct of kind of this export of American pop culture through media?
So I think that denim and jeans are kind of fundamentally, historically, an American garment that then got exported in various ways around the world, but carried some of the elements of this sort of American socio-political, cultural meaning with it, but then took root in all these places around the world that now have their own extremely vibrant, dynamic denim culture. So we can no longer say that like jeans are American. I would say that jeans ended up this globally recognized phenomenon because of their history and original production in the United States that then got disseminated both through the American military presence globally and from movies and pop culture and rock and roll and these other things, but then other cultures, other countries made it their own. And now what's fascinating is that most jeans are not made in America. You know, so now I would say that like fundamentally jeans are a global product. They are something that has that sort of root system that connects to America, but has morphed into a completely global phenomenon.
Are there any sort of examples that we can think of where something looks kind of non-American in terms of jeans culture abroad? I mean, you mentioned the Japanese kind of
the
industry.
Japanese are the best example,
Okay.
I would say. And the classic example that I always love to give in my I should have brought them with me because I do actually have a pair of these. My favorite jeans to talk about in this regard is there's a Japanese company called Capital, and that's Capital with a K. And they are sort of, in terms of Japanese denim companies, on the younger side. A lot of the Japanese companies started out creating exact copies of historical American jeans. Like getting old Levi's and like replicating
Those
them.
ones that were left in the mines.
Yes, and even like, but they also, like the Japanese, there was a period in American history in the 80s in particular when everybody wanted stonewashed and acid wash and these new jeans.
Oh, I had, yeah.
And so nobody was keeping all these old Levi's. Like they weren't considered valuable, they weren't considered interesting. Levi's didn't have an archive of its own that it was keeping, and Japanese collectors and Japanese companies, there was a huge market for old pre-war and post-war jeans. And so all this stuff went to Japan. And that's what originally a lot of these Japanese companies were doing, was like creating versions of Levi's. And then Levi's would sue the crap out of them, and then they would change their name. Like, for example, one of like the biggest original brands is now called Evisu, E-V-I-S-U. Originally, it was just called Levi's. And then they sued and they took off the L.
Sure.
Right. So there's like, but it shows that they wanted to create, to your point about this authenticity and this heritage product. And there's a whole version of products coming out of Japan and a market called new vintage, which sounds like an oxymoron because but they would take historical denim and they would literally sort of sand it down to create exact copies of actually made wear patterns. Like, it's fascinating, it's fascinating. But the reason I love Capital is because Capital is the next generation, where what they're interested in doing is taking this infrastructure of this Japanese culture, of this Japanese denim culture, but then also looking back to Japanese own really rich history and culture of indigo and cotton, because it has its own long history of working with these same materials, but in different ways. And so one of their sort of mainstay products is this thing called Century Denim. If I were, and I should have brought them, if I were to hold them up, like they look like they're like kind of like a weird gray pair of jeans. You're like, okay, what's so special about this? If you look at them really closely, yes, they're made out of cotton, but they're actually not denim, because they have like a texture that looks like denim. But if you look closely, it's actually done with what's called sheshiko, which is a technique of Japanese embroidery that's essentially like a running stitch of cotton threads. And it's done just in like, in stripes, sort of going up the jeans, like very small. This was used in Japan to make fabric more durable. And it was done in sort of aesthetic patterns. And then it also sort of looks like it has like the same color as jeans. And it would fade the same way jeans would. But it's not done with rope dyeing, which we talked about before. Instead, the indigo is painted on the surface, which is, again, another traditional Japanese technique of using indigo as a wash. So and then it's made into like this very heritage-looking pair of 5-pocket riveted jeans with like a cinch back strap. So what you have is this complete hybrid garment that is an artifact of this like rich global cross-pollination of denim and jeans culture and history. It's completely a Japanese garment, but it's also obviously steeped in the history of jeans as they were created in America.
That's amazing. And
so yeah, I should have brought them.
Yeah, I know. Next time, okay.
Everybody go Google Century Denim.
When you come back, well,
and then be shocked by how much they cost.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They're like $400 now. They used to be. This is also inflation. They used to be like $200 a few years ago, and now they're much more.
Well, I'm sure it's like TikTok trends just drive
yes,
things.
Capital is very trendy, so they made all their stuff more expensive now.
Now I'm going to ask kind of a silly question. I actually don't know the answer and want to, but it will model that you can ask whatever. Say I took a piece of fabric made out of wool or linen, and I dunk it in indigo. Am I wearing jeans?
Oh, well,
jeans, do they have to be cotton?
Well, so this is the big, I talk about this in my book. have you asked me this before? Because I talk about this in my book.
No, I haven't. What is your book?
Well, no, it's so, I talk about it in the like Denim Fashions Frontier book that I did with the exhibition, is that there is this fundamental question about like what is denim? And purists, you know, the people who sort of ascribe to this sort of authenticity of, you know, Levi's and that version of American denim would say that it is like a particular weight and it's cotton and it has to all be cotton and the weft threads, which is like the fill threads, are naturally undyed, and then the warp threads are blue indigo dyed, and like that is denim, right? And it has to have that warp face twill weave structure. But now, I mean, these are jeans and they're denim, but they're stretchy and they're black and they don't have a fill that's a different color. And we see all sorts of things made that are like visibly look like jeans, that are like trying to be denim, but like aren't denim. That like, I think that there's a really fascinating question to be had, that at what point does denim stop being denim and start being something else? And I found this really difficult while I was researching for the exhibition, was to pinpoint exactly what denim is, because if you look at the products that are out there on the market that are being called denim, not very few of them conform to this historical notion of what denim is. And so I made the connection to that, the Theseus's ship.
Oh, yes.
The Theseus's ship, which is the idea that the Athenians kept Theseus's ship and they preserved it, and then they kept replacing, you know, the mast broke, and then, you know, I don't know any parts of ships. They all broke and they all got replaced. And so at what point was Theseus's ship no longer the original ship? Yeah. Because now all the parts had been completely replaced and it was materially something entirely new. And that's how I feel about denim. We've added stretch, we've changed all this stuff, we've dyed it all these different colors, we made it into everything possible. So what is denim anymore?
What is denim?
I mean, I will say, just as a point of something that I personally, like, because I am a denim scholar who loves all the experiments that fashion does, and I think it's really interesting. Valentino made a pair of jeans that were all hand embroidered beading. Oh. And like from far away, it looked like you were wearing, like the model was wearing a pair of navy jeans with like fade marks on it. But it was all hand beaded in a very specific way. Bottega Veneta made also a similarly sort of like printed jeans that were made out of leather. Wow. That you couldn't tell from far away. I think these things are fascinating because to me it just points to this endlessly mutable vocabulary of jeans. And why make it beading and put it in a couture show? Like, that's crazy, but it's fascinating. Anyway. I love it. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would love to take some questions from the audience and see what people might be wondering about. Yay, questions. When my undergrads, and I'm like, any questions? And they're like, let us out of class. They shrink, Avoid eye contact at all costs. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah, okay. What a fun presentation. Really appreciate it. And my question is about stretch.
Yes.
So is the stretch phenomenon manufacturing driven, or is it consumer driven? I hate stretch.
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. So I would say that it's a bit of both. So one thing is that the dominance of stretch in just in denim production really connected to two different things. It was first integrated into the premium, female consumer-driven, really sort of soft, early 2000s jeans, but then it got really intense with the rise of skinny jeans. And if anyone's sort of familiar with just like how skinny jeans got, like they would not have worked without stretch. And so something that's tricky in that is that because people were interested in this skinny jeans style that required a lot of stretch to achieve, people got used to the feeling of stretch in jeans. And so this resulted in a couple of different things. It resulted in a backlash. It resulted in people just like really not wanting stretch, which is a major sort of part of the market right now, and we've seen a move away from stretch. But then also certain consumers just getting used to that sensation, maybe never even having experienced having non-stretch jeans, which means that if that's what they expect, manufacturers aren't going to be like, well, no, I'm not going to, I'm sorry, we're not making skinny jeans anymore. We're, going to have no stretch. Another thing I will say about stretch is that one reason manufacturers and consumers like stretch is because fit and sizing have always been a massive problem in mass manufactured clothing. Clothing is sized proportionally, and that means that not a lot of people fit in clothing that is mass manufactured, or at least don't fit very well. Stretch is the forgiving ingredient. And that's not, just like saying that, whatever sort of size or anything like that. What it means is that it accommodates a wider range of proportions, and so you get a better fit. At the end of the day. Now, not everybody likes that sensation, but because of these different things kind of coalescing around a particular style that dominated the market, it led to this issue with stretch just being something that I don't really see going away, because stretch also now got so, enmeshed in the denim industry with skinny jeans. It got enmeshed in people's everyday wardrobes with athleisure and yoga clothing and leggings. And now stretch is in everything. This, and part of it is technological. It was seen as a real boon for the industry that in the 80s, they figured out a way to integrate a minimal amount of stretch.
And this is synthetic?
Yes, a stretch synthetic, all stretch is synthetic.
Okay.
I should say, manufactured. Okay. Because it's not necessarily synthetic. Anyway, that's like a whole nother fiber conversation. But the point is that in the 80s, they figured out how to integrate a minimal amount of stretch with a natural fiber, where the ultimate product felt and looked like that fiber. Like it looked like you were wearing cotton, wool, silk, but it still had that stretch. And the industry loved that it meant that they could just give customers a better fit.
And one of the things we didn't talk about, which is, I'm sure stretch is tied up also in body image and kind of popular images of what bodies are supposed to look like.
And this is a whole nother sort of like rabbit hole of research. Actually, I'm finalizing my dissertation right now, which is on the early history of standardized sizing in this country. And stretch has become, connected to notions of to weight bias. That if you have a body that needs stretch, that's a bad thing. There's like parts of this sort of embedded in the cultural discourse around it, which I don't agree with, which I think we should sort of push back on. At the same time, there are difficulties with stretch being integrated into jeans because it makes it so that you can't reuse the fibers. So there's, again, the reality is that fashion is incredibly dynamic and complex, and so there's no one kind of catch-all for an ethical approach.
So nor do they last as long because of the spandex or whatever.
Well, so that depends. Do you mean in terms of like the spandex like degrading?
Yes.
Well, so I would say that there's a lot of also like myths and misconceptions about natural versus synthetic fibers. A lot of this has to do with the fact that synthetics, I would say, are just not overarchingly like whole hog bad. And so they do actually can last a significant amount of time. And so it isn't hard and fast rule that if something has stretch in it, that it's not going to last as long as something that doesn't have stretch in it. There's a lot of different factors that go into it.
And one last part of this, sorry, is there an economic factor here? Is it cheaper to produce jeans?
I don't think that it's cheaper to produce jeans with stretch, because actually you can find like extremely expensive, like high-end Japanese denim that has some stretch in it. So I think that there's versions of both at all levels of the market.
Any other questions?
So a little bit more about recycling.
Yes.
There's new legislation in Massachusetts saying that we can't put textiles into trash.
Oh,
And yet
good.
I have
You
some
guys-
friends,
you've
and we are
taken
all
care of
looking
that.
for places to take our fabric, and
Yes.
there are no places.
Yep.
But if the fabrics aren't able to be recycled, what's happening to these fabrics that we're supposedly saving from the landfill?
Well, so it depends on what you mean by recyclable. So what I would say is that when I say that like we can't recycle like a stretch thing, is that we can't make it into another pair of cotton garment anymore. Most textile recycling ends up making types of what are called industrial textiles, not necessarily garments. So if you go and sort of drop something off, it will most likely, hopefully, instead of going to a landfill or instead of going to another part of the world that doesn't want our textile waste, it would hopefully either end up in a space where if it was wearable again, somebody might wear it, somebody might make it into something you would wear, or that it would go into the pipeline to make insulation, rug pads, other types of industrial that are used in building materials and other industrial applications, which actually use a lot of textiles and a lot of fibers. So that's the ideal space for it to go. But again, there has to be an infrastructure to get from point A to point B. And I would say that there's a lot of, there's a lot of work that needs to go into these sort of pipelines. Like one issue that has also been found, for example, just in like a fashion context, is that there was a company, a startup, that wanted to essentially like fully recycle sneakers. Like people would sort of send their old ones in and then they would get kind of remade and reused. And the issue wasn't actually with the factory that was going to kind of do that actual textile work. It was the fact that the logistics of mailing like individual pairs of shoes, because it's not scalable. Like this is a big issue, is that like you're talking about individual consumers and getting these materials from point A to point B. So I would say that at the moment, one of the biggest issues in terms of recycling and like finding a use is logistical more than anything else. And so in terms of Massachusetts, I mean, that's great. Don't put clothes in the garbage.
Yeah.
As I said, I love that idea, but it means that there needs to be something like sort of drop-off locations, collection the same way we have if you were doing compost. I mean, I don't want to get political in Massachusetts. I don't live here, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna say what stuff should be.
Don't ask about
But I would say
mattresses.
that there are actually a lot of applications. It's just a question of sort of how do you get the stuff from individual consumers to the spaces that can repurpose.
And I will say, like, our museum has hosted repair cafes, which are more
yes.
interesting. And one of the most popular...
Mending. Everybody should mend.
One of the most popular tables is the mending table,
Yes.
because it's not so much about, how much the garment is damaged. That skill
Yes.
of mending.
Yes.
Just people aren't learning that anymore.
absolutely.
And actually miss it.
Yes. No, this is, and I think that mending, and there's different versions of mending, a big sort of, kind of pivot that people are advocating now is something called visible mending, where you make a sort of, artistic or creative, like visually.
Like a fancy patch.
Yes, exactly. So instead of kind of making it try to look new, you instead make it into something unique and expressive and sort of artistic, and that can be a sort of skill that you learn and build. Another thing that I'm trying to integrate on, or that I've seen friends integrate onto some of their campuses, and I would love to bring to St. John's, is clothing swaps.
Oh, yeah.
Right, these more sort of communal, instead of just like dropping a garbage bag at Goodwill and being like, that'll get to someone in need, instead having communal spaces that can become swapping, where you bring in what you don't want, and you look at what other people don't want and maybe take some stuff for yourself.
Sure. Yeah, we have a book thrift store around the corner in Waltham that really built itself on, it's a nonprofit, of collecting in books and then reselling them.
Yeah.
And it got a little bit into clothes, and now it's bigger than the books.
Yeah,
the clothes part. And they post it on social media and that kind of thing. And it's a big deal now.
I would say an interesting brand that I think is changing the discourse around how we think about clothing is, in these terms, is Eileen Fisher. Eileen Fisher has always sort of made in the US, she's made in New York, she's been an advocate for sustainable practices, but on her website and in her clothing, she actually makes consumers decide whether they want to buy a first life garment, a second life garment, or an afterlife. Like, she makes people aware that, like, if you are buying a brand new product, you are the first life for this garment. And she allows people to drop back off, because also she doesn't design collections the same way a lot, so there's a sort of evergreenness to her products, which is sort of built into this business model. But you can bring garments back, and if they're just wearable as is, they will be in the second life. If they need to be remade, she will remake them. They'll patch them, they'll sort of cut them and combine them with pieces, and then that becomes a sort of remade Second Life collection. And if they can't, she makes them into pillows. Again, like using them as like stuffing and fiber in these other terms.
Sure.
I just wanted to mention that when I was watching the film, that every period of time that was shown,
Yes.
I lived through.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wore my jeans.
Oh, good.
I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
We had one or two pair, and we just wore different tops all the time.
Yeah.
But, I was there in Haight-Ashbury,
Yeah.
and I was there right when we were wearing our bell-bottom jeans.
Yeah.
What I wanted to mention was that in the 1980s, I believe, there was a period before the Iron Curtain opened up that friends of mine, right after that period, went to Russia, and all they wanted were blue jeans
Yes.
from the United States.
Yes.
So we collected tons of blue jeans and sent them over to Russia to people who wanted them there. And I would also like to point out, you were talking about more than words. They have a lot of the church on Church Street, the First Parish, has every Tuesday a clothing swap where you bring in clothes, you can pick up clothes.
That's great.
But there are many, many places like the thrift store where people, we have many immigrants who live in Waltham. And I think they probably don't have lots of money to buy clothes, so that bringing clothes to these places, bringing jeans to these places that are durable and very wearable is very helpful, because they can purchase them, anybody can purchase them very inexpensively.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a good thing to think about.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Clothing.
Maybe one or two more?
Oh, thank you. Just a quick comment. You brought to mind the discussion of the early jeans being very stiff, and I have a recollection, I guess, in the 50s growing up. It was a race whether I could break in a pair of jeans before I outgrew them and had to start all over again.
I love that. I love that. Yes, I think this idea of breaking in jeans was a major component of jeans ownership for a long time, which is why they got this reputation of, like, you have your favorite pair of jeans because you put so much work into getting them that way, right?
It's like that urban legend of, like, Anderson Cooper not washing his jeans for like a year at a time.
Oh, well,
People
that's like
complain.
very big in the raw movement.
Is that what it is?
You're not supposed to wash
I'm
your
not
jeans.
in that class.
You're not supposed to wash your jeans for 2 years. And then if they start to smell, you put them in the freezer because it kills the bacteria. It's true.
okay,
It's true.
okay.
And then you wash them and you get all these original wear patterns of your body.
Okay.
That's what that comes from. But I would say there's also the story of John Wayne before film shoots, like putting his jeans like off the dock in the salt water with like rocks in it, so that like he would have that like authentic look, cowboy look.
Maybe one more? I'll share with you one piece, which is there's something to watch for the next generation of jeans or fibers. There's a team out of the University of Colorado at Boulder that is working with cellulose fibers that are completely degradable in terms of they can be returned to their original fibrous state and then reconstituted into new clothing.
Very cool.
So that might be a future topic.
Yes, I think that there's a lot of work going into sort of regenerative and compostable fibers. And I will say that, because you told me I should do this, I will give a shameless plug that if people are interested in the sort of next chapter of like looking at jeans and thinking about this, I have a book coming out next month with Yale Press called Redressing American Fashion, that someone had sort of mentioned, like, this documentary was made in 2021, so we're in a sort of different era of thinking about this history and its implications. And so the new book kind of looks in particular at jeans, but other forms of American fashion, thinking about sort of how everyday people have left sort of imprints on clothing and the stories of American culture, American history, and American fashion.
What was the name of it?
Redressing American Fashion.
Okay, excellent.
Wear as witness, that's the subtitle.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you to Emma for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.